And secondarily, when we were college kids, we didn't have any money. How do you fund? It's one thing to produce a small amount in a lab or in your mom's garage. It's another thing to produce any quantity that a farmer can really use. And I said, okay, that's cool. Why aren't we doing that? And one thing led to another, and we ended up having a startup made to make fertilizer with earthworms. And now it's gotten to the point where we're actually selling our fertilizer to large farms in the tens of thousands of gallons and making a significant difference. There will not be a time, again, in your life when you have as little responsibility as right now. There will not be a time when you have as good of a shot at doing something like this as right now. The only way to succeed in solving these big problems is to stand up and fight them.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur Podcast, filled with marketing and leadership tips on launching and growing your business with your host, Deanne Mora.
Today's podcast will be a little creepier than usual, particularly if you're not a fan of squiggly creatures, but I think it's going to be fun. Sam Baker is the co-founder and CEO of Real Brew, a regenerative agriculture company turning earthworms and microbes into high-performance organic fertilizers. With a background in chemistry and economics and a passion for sustainability, Sam is pioneering new ways to transform waste like plastics and food scraps into living soil solutions. His work bridges science, entrepreneurship, and environmental stewardship. So Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with your backstory. What led you into the world of earthworms?
So it maybe wasn't an ordinary road that brought me to the world of earthworms, although I don't know if there really is one to get involved in worms. But I had no intention of working with worms when I first started. Originally, I was, as you learned, a chemistry student at the University of Central Florida, and I was very interested in pyrotechnics and studying things to that capacity. And I just kind of so happened to end up getting sucked down the wormhole, and it's kind of taken over my life, but it came from a place of passion originally. I was really passionate and concerned about fertilizer runoff here in Florida, where I'm from. So here in Florida, we have a lot of fertilizer that's being used for housing developments and for farms and all these other places. And because these fertilizers are kind of synthetic and toxic in nature, they end up destroying and killing a lot of the fish populations and a lot of the ecology. And around here, they ended up killing off my favorite fishing spot, the place where I'd been going with my grandpa and with like a lot of my family for years. And it put the issue of fertilizer runoff into very prominent place in my mind. It brought it to life in a very negative way. So I decided to do something about it. I ended up talking to my best friend, who was a biochemist, about what could be done regarding fertilizer production and how fertilizer is made and if there could be a better way to do it. And he said, yes, earthworms. Earthworms can be used to produce fertilizer from food waste. And I said, okay, that's cool. Why aren't we doing that? And one thing led to another, and we ended up having a startup made to make fertilizer with earthworms. And now it's gotten to the point where we're actually selling our fertilizer to large farms in the tens of thousands of gallons and making a significant difference.
Oh, that's amazing. I live in Florida here as well. I'm on the east coast of Florida. I'm in Fort Lauderdale, but I lived for many years in Sarasota, and I saw firsthand the impact of red tide, which maybe you can just share a little bit of background in simple terms for people as to what causes red tide and what it is, in case some of our listeners are not Floridians and have never seen it.
Certainly. So a lot of times when I talk about red tide, people think about football. They think about Alabama.
Different. That's crimson.
That's crimson tide. Very different thing. So red tide is a much more negative phenomenon. And what it is when we have a farm or a nursery or somewhere that grows plants, and they put a lot of fertilizer on those plants to try and get them to grow more, almost always they will use more than they should. And that fertilizer that they use ends up running off. So it goes through the soil, and then it goes through the water table, and it slowly but inevitably flows out to the ocean. And here in Florida, the ocean is all around us, so it pretty quickly will end up in the Atlantic or in Tampa Bay or in the Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico, whatever we're calling it now. And when it arrives there, it causes total havoc in the ecosystem. So these fertilizers we use are synthetic compounds that are basically steroids for plants. And around things like citrus or grass, they can cause them to bloom and get bigger. But when they reach the ocean or a bay or a lake, they cause the algae to bloom in such large numbers that they end up poisoning themselves and choking themselves out. So in Tampa Bay, we get a red kind of algae called K. brevis that responds very energetically to the inflow of fertilizer compounds. And it blooms to such a large degree when these happen that you can see it from space. And we call that red bloom a red tide. And that red tide ends up killing basically all the fish. It ends up producing a whole bunch of toxic byproducts, and it wipes everything out. And it's kind of like nuking an ecosystem. It's just catastrophic for them. And so the consequence becomes the more fertilizer we use, the more damage we do to these waterways. But there's also another negative side to it, which is even before the fertilizer reaches the waterway, when it's in the soil, it also ends up killing all the microorganisms that live in the soil and a lot of the decomposers as well. So it ends up killing earthworms, it ends up killing soil bacteria. And what that does is it makes the soil more destitute, which means we end up having to use more fertilizer to make our plants grow because the soil is worse, which then makes the soil even more worse. And you end up with this really bad negative feedback loop and more ecological destruction every year.
Yeah. And for those of you who have not experienced red tide, not only is it disgusting, it literally comes up on the beach and colors everything, but it makes it hard to breathe. You know, it hurts your eyes. And so it hurts the businesses that rely on tourism here as well, because nobody wants to go and play on the beach when it is that disgusting. So really, really, really important that we take steps to correct the issues that we've done to our planet with red tide. Whether you're an environmentalist or not, if you like going to the beach, it's a bad thing. So let's talk about the company. So were there any pivotal moments that transformed Wriggle Brew from a university project into an award-winning startup?
Yes, there were several. So you don't go from idea and project at school to company overnight. It's a long and winding road, and I'm still learning the process as I go. And what got us started is we started the research on trying to make a better fertilizer. And we had all these different avenues we were exploring. And after about 2 years working, we finally had something that really seemed to be effective. It was a really powerful fertilizer. It was positively impacting the crops and the soil we were using it on. So research-wise, we felt really, really happy. And then we said, okay, cool, let's turn this into a business. But as you know, that's like
Easier
a lot
said than done.
harder. Yeah. It's not just, okay, now I have a thing, people will give me money. No. First, we had to figure out all the legal and licenses. So you need to be a registered fertilizer. You have to pay for licenses. You have to pay all these different inspection fees. So there's a lot of certification, other stuff you have to go through. And that's quite expensive and time consuming. And secondarily, when we were college kids, we didn't have any money. How do you fund? It's one thing to produce a small amount in a lab or in your mom's garage. It's another thing to produce any quantity that a farmer can really use. So first we started making some basic sales at like garden shows and farmers markets, but those were, you don't get very much revenue from that. So we ended up hearing about, I was a senior by this point at UCF. We ended up hearing about a competition that our university was hosting called the Joust. So you probably know UCF very well. UCF's mascot is the Knights. Everything at UCF is night themed, including our business competition. So the Joust is kind of like a Shark Tank style event, but everything is night themed. So at the Joust, there's a $15,000 grand prize, but it's not easy to get there. You have to go through several rounds of competition. In fact, you have to, in our year, I think there were about 80 different people competing, groups, companies, things like that. And one of them had backing from Google and Microsoft. One of them was doing rocket engines. Another one was doing drones. Very advanced topics. And then we were the worm poop guys. And that's actually how they introduced us on stage, you know. But we had traction. We had a few actual sales under our belt. We had testimonials. And so, and what we were doing was really positively beneficial to both farmers and to ecology. So we ended up taking the grand prize. And that was huge for us. It was $15,000, which, you know, it doesn't sound like a lot if you're in the business world, but for a couple of college kids, it was a huge thing, even just mentally, to win that. Because now there was no excuse, you know?
Now it's real.
Now it's real. So we got to work making some new equipment. We got some real marketing. We got a website and all this. And we also were able to use the funding to basically take some time off to put together a pitch to the National Science Foundation. So if you're not aware as a business person, you can, if you have an interesting technical idea or research idea, you can actually get funding for it through through small business innovation research grants that the federal government funds. The National Science Foundation funds them, the EPA funds them, the USDA does. So if what you're doing is relevant to one of those agencies, which ours was, then you can ask for funding, and they can fund you up to $275,000. And that's enough money to get to rent a little facility and get some real industrial equipment and pay salaries and things like that. So that was our first priority, was to go after one of those. And we went after one with the EPA, and we didn't get it. But we learned a lot about the process, and then spent another couple weeks going after one with the NSF, the National Science Foundation. And we did win that, and we actually won the maximum amount for that. We won $275,000, which was amazing, and it allowed us to get a space, get some real equipment, and start pitching this and marketing this to industrial scale farmers. Eventually, we got a few of them interested. We got samples out to them. They loved the samples, and then they started ordering quantities in the thousands of gallons. And at that point, now you have a real business.
That's amazing. Yeah, and for any of our listeners who haven't either seen or been involved in a pitch competition, it's hard. I've had the pleasure of judging pitch competitions in the past, and even just prepping the founders to do the pitches. I mean, it is, I hats off to you that you went through that process, because it is really, really difficult. I remember stopping founders like every other word and going, no, that's not clear enough. Just to try to prep them. But I mean, that's what you have to do, because it's very, very competitive. So yeah, so that's amazing.
But it's also a lot of fun.
So Wriggle Brew has a playful name, but a serious mission. So
Yes.
How did you develop the brand voice for the product, and how do you balance being approachable with being scientifically credible? Because you have a very important mission, but you've kind of made it fun in a way. So what was it? Talk to me about developing that brand voice.
Certainly. Well, it's difficult, but if it's not fun and if it's not easy to understand, then you're gonna really, really struggle to get people invested, to get people interested, and to make any sales. So for us, it was a matter of finding a way to communicate the benefits succinctly. And one of the ways we did that is, from the start, we assumed that we did not know necessarily what our customer, or rather what we did not know what our customers wanted. Basically just being honest about that. And rather than assuming you know what your customer wants, we decided to start surveying and asking our customers very directly what they wanted, so that we'd actually have that data to base all of our strategy off of. And what did that look like? Well, for us, it meant going to garden clubs, going to farmers markets, going to farmers, going to garden shows, and yes, selling prototypes of the product to get feedback, but also giving away surveys. So a lot of surveying. We wanted to gather as much data as possible from people, because essentially when we put out our original product and our original language and branding around it, we were kind of you're just guessing. You're guessing what people are going to like or what they're going to respond to. So by doing the surveying, we were able to end up figuring out, oh, actually, they respond more to this. They respond more to this. They don't. And I know that sounds very simple, but I've noticed this again and again with people in the business world. they create all this marketing and branding purely from their assumption of what will sell, purely from, oftentimes, essentially, they're selling to themselves. And you are not your customer. Your customer is your customer. And if you're not speaking their language and selling to them what they want, then you're not doing much of anything. You're just spinning your wheels. So all of the ideas we had about what would make this product sell for the most part were wrong, but we were able to discover that very early on because we asked people. We sent out a bunch of surveys and we did statistical analysis on those surveys. So we can say, okay, for a fact, this trait correlates to more people being interested. And for us, the safety element was what really turned out to be enormous. When people buy fertilizer, yes, they're interested in how pretty it makes their plants look. Yes, they're interested in, does it fight off pests a little bit or something like that. But what really helps is them understanding that this worm tea stuff is safe for your kids. It's safe for your pets. It's something that if you pour it on your hands, unlike the stuff you might find at, the hardware store, it doesn't say wash your hands off for 20 minutes. If you get it in your eyes, you don't have to wash your eyes out for 30 minutes. You don't have to go to the hospital if you drink it. It's gross, but you don't have to go to the hospital. Communicating that is really key. People care about pollinators, but more than that, they care about their kids. They care about their pets.
Yeah.
So if you can make that clear, then you're really speaking the language of the consumer. And that
Yeah.
was only revealed to us by data, by statistics.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So there's something called the expert trap that, not only science companies fall into, but, even attorneys, because they're used to using legal language and they're used to communicating in a certain way. And so they assume that if I give you all of the facts and data, that naturally you're going to buy. But we don't buy that way as consumers. We buy based on our emotions.
Yes.
And so, as much as I remember when I spent many years working in corporate America, and you'd have these sales pitches that would, always start with, we're so big and the map, and here's, all the things that we do. That's not why people are going to work with you. So yes, that's really interesting. So what was it about the research that made you, so that it was the safety aspect, but then somehow you landed on the name Wriggle Brew? So you were looking at something that was a little bit more approachable, or were you like having a beer one night and just went, hey, we should call it this? Like, how did you come up with the name?
I wish I came up with it. Actually, my friend Hayden came up with it, and we laughed really hard when we first heard it. It was just really funny. It's a tongue twister, it's a funny name, and it leaves a good, impression in your mouth, because you can't say Wriggle Brew without kind of being a little humor.
Smirk a little.
Yeah. But that's a positive emotion. It's a good feeling.
Yeah.
And that's what you want. You want people to enjoy even the name of what you're doing and
Yes.
find it a little funny,
Yes.
And so we were like, this is a good name. It's a tongue twister. It's memorable. And it also elicits people asking questions. I always get asked, is this a beer? Is this a drink? Is this? And that is a little annoying, admittedly, but it also starts a conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you land on this kind of cool, quirky name, and then you realize that consumers care very much about safety.
Yes.
And especially, when you think of, I think it was it Roundup, that there's still, class action lawsuits, the stuff that we used to just spray on our driveway and, kill the weeds. And then you let
Yes.
your kids go play in the driveway, and then they find out it causes cancer. So, I mean, I think there's definitely some precedents for consumers have every right to be concerned about what they're putting on their plants, but it still is. It sounds like a very the product itself, the formulation is founded in science. So how do you then simplify and communicate the Wriggle Brew message to those consumers?
So avoiding jargon is one of the big pieces. So communicating science has been a challenge for generations, because scientists, for one, a lot of people think of them as ivory tower type people, maybe siloed into academia. So even using very scientific lingo can, while maybe boost credibility, also alienate your audience to some degree. You also don't want to be too simplistic in it, because then you miss the meat of the issue. People go, okay, that sounds nice, my plants are pretty, but why? So it's a tightrope you got to walk. And for me, one of the best ways to walk that tightrope is with imagery, with pictures. Pictures worth 1,000 words. people may not know exactly what you mean by it improves yields. May not know what yields look like for their azaleas or for their hibiscus, but they know what a before and after is, and they know what a with and without is. So having imagery that shows the difference, that makes a big, big key. And then that's one of the great things about fertilizer product is you can really tell when it's working or when it isn't. You put it on a plant and the plant looks better and healthier, and the same plant in the same conditions without does not. You have everyone understands that experiment. That's a very straightforward experiment to show. And I think a lot of products that are very effective at communicating do this. They focus a lot on, okay, it has this in it, and this is what this does. And you can see this here, and here's what you're seeing. And a picture's worth 1,000 words. Scientific communication, I think, can best be achieved a lot through visuals. It's the same principle in like filmography or in books, show, don't tell. You emphasize, you kind of let the audience fill in the blanks a little bit about, what do you describe this benefit as? So
Yeah,
I think that
absolutely.
describes it.
Yeah, very much so. So all right, so let's kind of going back here. So you've landed on a name, you've figured out your messaging, you've built your website. You initially it sounded like you were doing the farmers market circuit, which a lot of small brands have done to start, and that can be a very effective way to communicate. Obviously, it doesn't scale, but it still can, you start to get the word out.
You learn a lot,
So
yeah.
what did you find were the most effective marketing channels to bring Wriggle Brew to market? How did you get found?
So a lot of it has been social media, primarily things like Facebook. Facebook is a lot where a lot of gardeners hang out. And so, you want to go to the social media that's appropriate for your audience. Like if I'm spending all my time on TikTok, yeah, I'm going to reach some gardeners, but maybe it's not going to be as target rich of an environment. Um, but if I go to Facebook, it's much more target rich environment. But another thing that really helped was going to garden clubs. This is kind of an old school method, but it really works. I went to basically every garden club I could find in like a 100-mile radius, and I gave a presentation. And yeah, you're only talking to 30 or 40 people at a time, but if you give a good presentation, you really clearly lay out the facts and why what you're doing is important, you will get 30 to 40 gardeners very interested and very invested. And every time you do that, you make a little nucleus of people who become extremely strong advocates for you. And they tell all of their friends, because the people who go to the garden clubs are the community experts of that little town or that little region. So yeah, the one person in there maybe only is going to buy one bottle from you, but that one person is going to buy bottles from you continuously. And they're also all of their friends and neighbors who don't go to the garden club are going to ask their neighbor who does, what should I do about X? What should I do about Y? And so you create these little clusters. It's kind of like guerrilla warfare, these little cells of people who become advocates for you. And that helped us a lot. And eventually I was able to do that enough where I got a couple nurseries and other people really interested in us. And when Earth Day rolled around, I was able to get us on TV. They did an Earth Day special on us for our local news channel because of everything we'd been doing. And as a consequence, they came out, they filmed us, and when we went to TV, a bunch of companies saw us and started asking to try our product. And that's how we got some distribution online. That's how we got into a bunch of stores. And from then we've just been, growing and growing and rolling.
That's
But that was the hill we had to overcome to bring in the inertia.
Well, I think so in terms of lessons, I'm hearing, definitely go where your target audience is. And so when you were on Facebook, were you running ads? Were you in groups? Like how were you finding your audience on Facebook?
Both. So it was a lot of ads, but also a lot of going into groups and just sometimes even just observing and seeing what are people complaining about? What are their problems? What are the points that distress them? And then finding ways to communicate to them that, hey, we have a thing that maybe helps with that. That made a big difference. And also by going to all these clubs and these garden clubs and talking to people, we were able to learn a lot of the lingo, learn a lot of the verbiage that was used, and then incorporate that into our communication in Facebook where those other gardeners were. So now we're really speaking their language because we've learned from actual gardeners.
Well, you're, pardon the pun, grassroots marketing, but I mean, you're definitely, you're refining your personas through that process and developing referral partners, which applies to
Yes.
multiple types of businesses, right? So it's like the actual, as much as, everyone talks about digital, sometimes just going out and shaking hands and educating groups, small groups can be really helpful to your business because to your point, it absolutely builds. So in terms of social media, what has your experience been with organic content marketing? So think of like social posts, blogs, video, engaging, finding other audiences on social. Like what has worked and what hasn't worked for you?
I mean, this is not to sound cliche, but like cliche, consistency. Consistency is key. I had this idea that we were going to post something and it was going to be viral, and then we wouldn't have to do much social media stuff. That's not how it works. You have to continually put things out on social media. You have to continually engage with people. You have to continually put out comments, and you will lose a lot of time and money when you start doing this. It's a long-term investment. It takes like 30 to 90 days at least to even start seeing traction and like followers and stuff like that. So it is a long road to make social media your main driver of your income, unless you're really, really good at it or have someone who's really, really good at it. But by being consistent, you begin to grow and you begin to start seeing people get interested. And for me, really the method has just been make lots of little videos, talk about lots of little things, and just put one or two out every week or more if you can.
And were you trying to engage, like, are you trying to also connect with other accounts and find other like micro influencers on social? Has that been something that's worked for you?
Not really. I mean, I've tried. I've actually tried to talk to a lot of like micro and small influencers, but they're surprisingly hard to reach. Like for example, recently on Instagram, I sent out like 10 or 15 DMs and I got like two responses. And it was, yeah, hey, I'm interested in, like I want to send you some free stuff. I want to see what your thoughts are on it. And you don't get a lot of responses. I think it, you know, it could be definitely the messaging, but I think also a lot of influencers are very informal. So, especially the small and micro influencers. So they don't operate with the same kind of professionalism, so to speak, as a business does. And as a consequence, they can be surprisingly hard to work with and very flaky.
And kind of ironic considering that they really should be on social media all the time, but
You would think, but
you would think.
it's also like, when you're a small influencer, why are you a small influencer? Well, you might be doing a niche subject, but you also might be someone who's doing this more as a hobby. And
Yes.
so you're, less available. The it's rare to find a small influencer on the grind who's going to become a big influencer.
Mm.
90% of the small influencers you meet are going to stay small influencers.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, they're
But
valuable for their specific small audience that's very targeted, obviously. But and some of them have evolved to the point where they just want cash. Like,
yeah,
maybe they used to take product in exchange for
for
putting
content.
posts
Yeah.
for you. But now some of them, if they've been offered cash, they're like, oh, this is better. I'll take cash. So they may they may not pay attention to the offer.
Yeah, and that actually for like YouTube, that's really tough because the YouTube market is now so saturated with big businesses. The average like YouTube ad is like it's like $5,000, $10,000 or more for like a very basic little mention.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that puts it out of reach of startups for the most part.
Yeah. Now, you seem to have learned a lot about marketing for someone with a background in science. So how did you develop your marketing instincts? Did you have to learn it? Was it all like trial and error? Did it come naturally?
It's a lot of trial and error. Marketing is a science. People call it an art, but in many ways, it really is a science. It's a lot of hypothesis testing. You have an idea of what will work, you put it out there, and you see if it does. And you learn little bits of data every time you do it. People look they think of marketing a lot as an art because there is art involved. There is language crafting and word crafting, but in the end, it's really just A/B testing. It's a lot of trial and error, and And once you accept that, it becomes, I think, a lot more mentally easy. When you have less of an emotional stake in an ad you put out because you see it as a work of art you made, it becomes a lot easier to focus on what works and to identify what works, even if you don't, because a lot of times what works doesn't make sense to you or you don't like it. And that's okay because it's supposed to work. It's not supposed to satisfy you.
Yeah, and it's again, it's about your target audience. It's not about you.
Exactly. So you have to have a little humility there. I think to be in marketing, you have to have a lot more humility.
Mhm.
And to be in business, you have to be in marketing.
That is those are, I think that's a t-shirt right there. So how does customer feedback influence any product improvements or new offerings that you might have in mind?
So you definitely want to listen to your customers when they say, I like this or I don't like this. Um, for me, a lot of the things that they like are unfortunately some of the more difficult things to do. Like, for example, people tend to really like having a spray head on top of a bottle, but that spray head can raise the price by like 30%.
Oh,
And
interesting.
it makes the production way more complicated. Like it causes all these downstream problems. You have to source new parts, you have to like figure out how it's going to be made in production, like all this stuff related to one little quality of life improvement that the customer likes. And conversely, the things that they don't like, well, sometimes people are really, you get like a really passionate, angry email, like, I don't like this element of your product. And you get the instinct, like, oh crap, okay, I need to fix that. But if you actually look at the numbers and the number of people who care about that, you might find out that actually only like one person really out of 100 really cares about that. And putting in, making the cost go up by 20% or putting in 20% more effort to satisfy that 1% of your audience is not logical. So you have to balance these things. Like, maybe I want to add this feature people like, but at the same time, if I increase the price, it's going to make it harder for most of my customers. On the other hand, there's this one thing people really don't like about it that's an artifact of how it's made or something like that, but most people are fine with it. And I have to accept losing a few of those customers in order to keep things easy for the rest of them. So it can become a very, very delicate matter. And oftentimes the most verbal, the most communicative customers are not representative of the vast majority of people who actually buy your product. So you've got to watch out for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, don't get pulled down a wormhole.
Yeah, exactly.
So as you look ahead, are there plans to incorporate technology like apps or smart gardening tools or anything along those lines to enhance the user experience with Wriggle Brew products?
To some degree, like I definitely like having a website that's more of a resource. I definitely like the idea of integrating more AI into maybe improvements of the product and automation. But I actually want to really avoid adding like an app and like all these other different elements because something I've noticed is a lot of companies they have feature bloat where they end up creating like all these other things in their product that makes it confusing and you only get so much communicative space and time with your audience. You don't want to confuse them by being like, oh, and also there's an app and it does all this and this and this and this because I'm not an app company ultimately. I don't want to maintain all of that. I don't want to have customers talking about the app and getting confused about the app and all that. I want to hyper focus on the things that really matter to my customer. I want to do that to the very best that I can. I think a lot of people get so caught up in looking professional or maybe filling out all the check boxes on, look, I have a Twitter now, I have this and this and this and this, or an X, that they kind of lose the forest for the trees.
Yeah, absolutely. So your role as a CEO has, I'm sure, evolved from the beginning, and as you kind of look ahead, it'll continue to evolve as you scale. What leadership principles guide you in steering Wriggle Brew?
That's a very interesting question. So, for one thing, CEO is always kind of a made up title in a way. Like, what even is a CEO? Well, a CEO is ultimately, when you're a startup, the everything guy. The CEO is ultimately the person who puts out all the fires, makes all the hard choices, So it's nice to call yourself a CEO, but in reality, you have to realize that the title means very little. It's ultimately just a reflection of you're the one responsible for things. And that should really guide you in how you lead your company or your group of guys or gals or whoever you're with, because you have to realize that a good CEO is something of a servant leader. A company is not going to stand itself up around you. It's not going to appear suddenly to serve you or to give you a nice corner office. You have to do the hard things. You have to lead by example, or other people will not want to do those things. You have to be willing to come in first and leave last, and you have to be willing to, and that a lot of that sounds very reasonable, but when you do it over the long run, it becomes very exhausting. My uncle, who was successful in business, and I asked him a lot of things when I was first starting this, told me that the most important things you can have as a founder are stamina and aggression. Those are the two things you need. Now, the second one, everyone knows, aggression. You got to be aggressive to go after opportunities. You have to have energy to pursue opportunities when they emerge. But stamina, fortitude, that is the other thing that you really, really need, because you will have to stick with it. You will have to take the punches. One of my favorite movies is Rocky, and Rocky Balboa has to go the distance. He
Yeah,
has to get the crap beaten out of him for that whole fight. You have to be able to do the same.
that's
So I would say if you're a CEO or a startup founder, remember that you are you're Rocky. You have to be able to go the distance. You have to be able to take the punches, and you need to lead by example. Other people are not going to build this for you.
yeah,
It's your
yeah.
Lego set.
I think that's very words of wisdom. And so there's a lot of, I think, young entrepreneurs who are very passionate about starting businesses that will save the planet to one extent or another, mostly because, you all are the ones that are inheriting the crap that everyone else created. And so, and you want your kids and your grandkids to have a nice planet to live on, and
Yes.
not have all these things that we've been talking about in terms of pollution and red tide, et cetera. So for these other founders who are looking to launch their own sustainable startup, given what you've gone through with Wriggle Brew, how would you advise them? What would you tell them?
There's only so much advice you can give a person before they have to kind of just learn through the experience. But I would also say, when you are a young person, and this was something that I thought about a lot when I was first starting my business, there will not be a time, again, in your life when you have as little responsibility as right now. There will not be a time when you have as good of a shot at doing something like this as right now. The only way to succeed in solving these big problems is to stand up and fight them. And the best chance you have to do that is today. It's not tomorrow. So if you have an idea, even if it's not finished, even if it's not great in your mind, if it could solve a problem, if you think that it could succeed, if you think that you have the capacity to make it work, try now. Go after it now while the idea is fresh, while you don't have kids, while you don't have a wife, while you don't have people depending on you for survival. Now is the time to do it. That is my advice. I could tell you 20,000 different things about the minutiae of marketing and advertising and logistics and transport and all of that. You will figure it out, but you have to start.
Amen to that. Just Nike the thing.
Yeah, just Nike it. Just do it.
So where do you see Wriggle Brew in, say, the next 5 years? What is, if you could wave that proverbial magic wand, what impact do you hope that it will have on global agricultural practices?
Interesting question. I mean, I don't know if I want to know. I want to keep it more of a surprise to myself, but I really want to see this not only making fertilizing and farming in America a lot more affordable and a lot better for the environment, but I also want to potentially see this as a technology that's going to other countries, because a lot of countries around the world are very strapped for fertilizer. They're very strapped for inputs to their agriculture, and as a result, suffering from cyclical starvation. So the war in Ukraine in 2022 put this in very stark contrast. We had the price of fertilizer go up 400% when the war started. And farmers are already in very thin margins in America, and in many other countries, when they cannot afford inputs, they just die. And that is a human tragedy on a scale unfolding constantly that it boggles the imagination. So my ambition would be that this becomes a massive part of how we do agriculture here in the US, but also a cornerstone in making countries like Malawi and Mozambique and other places self-sustaining and capable of feeding their populations, so that, you know, we don't have children and people dying and starving to death when we have abundance and plenitude elsewhere.
Very, very well said. Sam, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. I think not only do you have a wonderful mission-based business, but I think you've really shared a lot of valuable insights for our listeners on marketing and growing a startup and just Nike that thing. So really wonderful having you here. If someone wants to either buy Wriggle Brew or if they want to connect with you directly, tell us, where can they find you?
Certainly. Well, thank you for having me on, first of all. But if you want to find me, you can always reach me at info, I-N-F-O, at wrigglebrew.com, WRIGGLEBREW.com. We check that email a lot, so any questions or ideas or concerns you have, send them that way. And if you'd like to try some of the product, which I highly encourage, if you have a garden bed, indoor plants, or anything growing in your house or area, you can get it at wrigglebrew.com. We are also on Amazon if you really like Prime, and we're in a lot of local stores throughout Florida, a few in Georgia, Texas, Utah, and a number of other places. So I encourage you to go after it and try some. And if you're thinking about starting a business, I encourage you to get after that as well.
Wonderful. Well, after talking to you, Sam, I'm certainly going to go out and put some on my garden. So looking forward to getting the Wrigley guys out there to make my plants look great and keep my little four-legged critter safe. So thanks for joining me again, Sam. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You as well. Pleasure.